Okay, so thank you for parents for coming to our Germinate Science Classroom online. This is
72.
This is coming into this season where we are still in our midst of our circuit breaker. So there's been lots of changes, especially with our students who are going into PSLE this year. So today our sharing session is really about how this 2020 changes for PSLE is going to affect this year's P6 students. And not only that, I will also be covering what are some of the important topics that P3 and P5 students should also be looking out for. Okay, so for those of you who have younger children, especially in the P3 to 5 age groups, this is also relevant to you. Okay, now because we do have a short time for this session, so I will appreciate that parents, if you have any questions, I can still take some questions in the midst of going through, but try to hold your questions till the end of the session if possible. Then I will answer more of the questions at the end so that we can hit everyone's time to this 45 minutes. Okay, so right, so for those of you who still don't know me, I'm actually teacher Jayce, and I've been teaching for many years. Of course, started teaching with PSL with 2 primary schools in the East. Okay, then after that, I went through to did my master's in education in Australia. Then came back and I started to go around different tuition centers first before now coming out to do on my own. Okay, and for me, my philosophy is always about teaching students the science of loving the subject rather than the mental state of just learning the academic portions. So I do get my students to do a lot of interesting stuff. Not only that, getting them to learn relevant things because things are always changing every year and every time. So it's always good to get our students to stay relevant. So I've taken many students all through these years, and of course, in my tuition years, I also have my different groups of students that I've seen them through. So for me, I take in students from all level of results. I don't screen students from coming in because I believe that it is more important that they really learn to conquer their fear and to love science rather than to just because they are not doing so well, then they get demoralized, and it harms them in terms of getting them demotivated to learn science. Okay. So P3 to P5 topics and PSLE 2020. Ministry has already released the topics that will be taken up for the PSLE 2020. So Ministry has turned them the common last topics. So for these common loss topics, let me go through what are some of the important topics that we have. And I'll be also showing you the breakdown of the different topics across the years. So because the full details is not out yet, Ministry is still trying to rush through setting the questions, thinking through what are the breakdowns in terms of the marks. It will still take them some time before it is released to everyone. But with the information that is already given to us, today I'll present to you 2 possible scenarios. In fact, I'll term them the worst scenario and the best scenario. So worst scenario being, I will explain why is it the worst, and the best scenario, I will explain to you why is the best. Okay, so let's talk about the P3 to P6 science topics. Now, all these are what I've listed down, and through my years of experience, I've helped students in understanding the topics across the different years. Of course, when I start with P3, doesn't mean that it is purely or strictly for P3, because all of us know that P3 and P4 now they are both considered the lower block. So it's up to the schools themselves to decide which are the topics that will be taught in a particular year. Okay, so that's why for some tuition centers, you realize that they follow their own curriculum, because they can't really cater to everyone. So they will try to look at what the students have, and then they will still try to do it their own way. Okay, so over here for P3, I listed down what are some of the minor topics. When I say minor, it's not minor in the year. I'm saying this is minor in terms of its weightage and its marks in terms of the PSLE paper. Okay, so when P3 goes through all these topics, or P4 goes through all these topics, it will still be important and it will still be tested a lot in the particular semester that they are doing these topics and tests and exam. Okay, so living things and non-living things, materials, then these are the two minor topics. Doesn't come out so often. The ones that are more major are your digestive system, plant system, and of course, magnets. Okay, because for digestive system, plant system, and magnets, they are still interrelated to other topics that are further down in the years. For P4, we have heat and light, which are major topics, and matter also. Only for life cycle of plants and animals is it considered more of a minor topic. So as the students go through all these topics, there's always a chance that they can forget. And there will come times in P5, P6 where they will revisit these chapters, and the students will then have to build on the existing knowledge that they have learned. So it doesn't mean that those topics that P3, P4 students learn, they can forget about them, and then P5, P6, they will learn again. No, it's actually a build-up in terms of the topics and the understanding. Okay, so just like math also have build-up in terms of the topics and the difficulty from P1 all the way to P6. For science, it's actually also the same thing. Okay, so you can't really learn them separately. Many of the topics are actually interrelated. And by the time you come to PSLE papers, the PSLE questions can have many topics in a single question. Okay. P5 being one of the major years, in fact, I would say that it's actually one of the major years, even more major than P6 in terms of the topics that they are learning. So there are quite a whole lot of topics that the P5 learn. So they learn from unit of life, which is actually cells, plant transport systems, human circulatory and respiratory system, electrical system. So you realize that quite a number of these topics are actually quite major. The only minor ones are things like maybe cells and reproduction in humans. So those are the ones that are taking less weightage. But for reproduction in flowering plants, water and changes of state plus water cycle, all these are major topics. Definitely, why are they major is because they are just the year before P6 PSLE year, and in terms of the freshness or the relevancy of the topics, it will definitely be important for PSLE. Then for P6, we have forms of energy and forces. These are two major topics, including the last few topics on interactions within the environment. That includes living together with its environmental characteristics, food chains, adaptations, and man's impact on the environment. So I've highlighted these last few topics in red because these are the topics that won't be tested for PSLE this year. Now, why did ministry decide on these last few topics for them not to be tested? That is because the schools teach at different speeds, and for the schools wise, they had to follow according to what school is at the slowest. So I know that some of my students, their schools only just finished forces a few weeks ago. That's why, in order to not disadvantage any of these students who are in the slower schools, they will have to stop at forces, and they can't test students beyond forces. Because if they were to test students beyond forces, there may not be enough time for the teachers to cover this syllabus within whatever time they have left. Now, even though we are most probably going to start school in June, we can't say for sure that there will not be another circuit breaker somewhere down the road. Because even ministry could anticipate a second wave in terms of the COVID-19. So that's when they really can't put the risk into teaching students and testing students what they may not even have the time to learn properly for this. So that's why all these four major topics will actually be taken out. So in terms of the common last topics, I'm not sure whether some of parents here, your child is taking foundation science. For foundation science, the interactions within the environment is the same, but you realize that foundation science, they learn actually less things. So in terms of the comparison between what is tested, definitely the key learning outcomes is lesser. So this is the listed learning outcomes for all the topics within the interactions for within the environment. So looking at the standard science, we have the living things and environment for part A, part B. Part C is of course our food web food chain. Then part D, part E, okay, and part F again about living things and the environment. For part G is on adaptations, and for part H is man's impact on the environment. So that's when all this becomes important, that your child, even though they are not going to be tested on this, in school they will still be teaching them. And I know that some schools are already planning to teach this to the students after their PSLE. Because post PSLE, again, there are usually a whole lot of activities after PSLE that the students are supposed to be going through. But with this COVID-19 situation that is being unknown, many of the activities that they have planned will have to be cancelled or postponed. That's why they will now use whatever time that they have left to go through all these common last topics after PSLE. Now, I know that some parents, you may plan to let your child rest or maybe go for a short holiday during or after PSLE. Do take note that even though these common last topics is not being tested for PSLE, this is actually a prior knowledge for the students, for your kids, because this will actually help the students to understand more before they go on to secondary school. Many of these concepts here will actually be tested again, more in depth again in secondary school. So don't shortchange your child by taking them out of school, because it's important that they actually learn some of these concepts and facts and understand them first, so that by the time they go on to secondary school, it actually helps them to still learn and understand much faster than others. Okay, so next one. Over here we have PSLE paper format. Just in case some of you don't know, because no matter how many times I go through parents' workshop with different groups of parents, I will always hear some parents, they do not know that the PSLE paper is set this way. So for those of you who have already bought your past year PSLE paper or book, which I have here. Okay, so the 2017 to 2019 PSLE Science Revision Guidebook, This is the book that most of your child, if you're in P6, they should have from school. So the important thing is, if you look at all the past 3 years papers, all of them has 28 MCQ, and the 28 MCQ, the first 14 questions are the life science questions. That means all the science questions has to do with living things. And then for the next 14 questions, we have those 14 questions that have to do with physical science, the non-living things. Then for booklet B, same thing. It has been 12 questions for the past few years, past 3 years. So 12 questions means that the first 6 questions, taking the first 22 marks, will actually be on life science questions. And then the next 22 marks will be on the physical science questions. Okay, so that is how the paper is separated in terms of life science and physical science. So it's good in that the paper is set this way so that it does not, it is quite balanced in terms of the topics that are being tested. Now, so this is the breakdown of the marks for the past 5 years PSLE in terms of the last four topics in interactions in the environment. That means living things and environment, food web, adaptations, and man's impact on the environment. So if you can look at the numbers, we have 2015, 8 marks plus 9. 2016, 6 plus 9. 2017, 10 plus 9. 2018, 8 plus 9. And 2019, 8 plus 18. These numbers, the first number is actually the marks for the multiple choice part. Okay, so I will have the MCQ marks plus the open-ended question marks equals to the total marks. Okay, so this is how I separated the marks in this manner. So you can see that for interactions in the environment, these last 4 topics, generally it can take between 3 to 5 MCQ questions. And for the open-ended question part, for 2015, 16, 17, 18, it has all been 9 marks total. Out of the whole life science 22 marks, 9 marks on just these last 4 topics. So 9 out of 22, that's actually quite a huge chunk. Okay, because that means there's only 13 marks left for the other topics. However, in 2019, last year, this was a weird year because the total number of marks for the open-ended part actually went up to 18 marks, which is surprising because that only leaves out 4 marks for other topics. Okay, so this leaves only 4 marks for the other topics, which means that if the PSL, for every year's PSLE, the topics that are coming out for the interactions in environment, generally it takes about 20 marks on average. So you really need to take note, if these 20 marks have been taken out, then what is going to take its place? That's the thing that I am most worried about for my P6 PSLE students, because there are 2 scenarios. So let me go through the 2 scenarios of what could happen once the ministry released the information. I'll start with the worst case scenario. Okay, I'll always go through the bad stuff first before we enjoy the good stuff. So for the worst case scenario, what I hope never to happen is that the weightage of the shift will not be going to physical science questions. Okay, so that means the 20 marks on average for the interactions within the environment topics. I pray hard that the ministry will not shift these 20 marks to physical science, because there have been some rumors going around saying that because these 4 topics are taken out for P6, then they will focus on the other 2 topics for P6, which is forces and energy. So some people are saying that these 20 marks for the living things, no, for the interactions in the environment may go to these forces and energy. And if that happens, I will have a heartbreak, because I know that there are many students who has great weaknesses in these 2 topics, physical science topics on energy and forces. And it takes a lot of effort for the teachers itself, for teachers themselves, to just try to explain to students how to go about doing energy and forces questions. The thing for energy and forces is they are actually tougher for students to do, because physical science is not so easy to understand. You can throw them any interactions in the environment questions, even though the students may not know fully what is happening, but they just have to think logically, because many of the things are happening in nature or around us. So it is always easier for students to learn and do questions that has to do with living things. Okay, so that is the worst case scenario, which I pray hard that it will not happen. Because yeah, if it really happens, then I don't know what to say to my students. Now, before I go on to the best case scenario, let's look at the breakdown of the marks for these 2 physical science topics, forces and energy. Forces and energy itself, you look through the years, the past 5 years, 2015 to 2019, roughly about 4 to 5 or sometimes even 6 MCQ on forces and energy, these 2 topics. Plus the open-ended part. Open-ended part, 2015 it was very low, just 2 marks. But for 2016, 17, 18, and 19, it was between 7 to 11 marks. So forces and energy, they do take still take quite a chunk of the marks for physical science. Okay, so again, roughly still quite close to 20 marks on average for forces and energy, just these 2 physical science topics. So I really do not hope to see the marks shifted to these forces and energy, because then it will really skew the whole paper towards more of a physical science paper, which more students will actually have problems answering the questions, because it's more difficult to understand physical science concepts than life science concepts. So then the next one would be the best case scenario. This is what I hope will come out. For the best case scenario, the weightage stays balanced on equal physical science and life science, which means that the number of questions, it is still limited to the same, with the first 14 MCQ on life science, next 14 MCQ on physical science. For the open-ended also, first 6 questions on life science and the next 6 questions on physical science. This is what I really pray and hope will happen, because if that happens, the topics that are removed will have to be replaced with the other life science topics, like reproduction in plants and respiratory system, circulatory system, unit of life, plants transport system. I suspect that they may even bring in the lower block life science topics like classification of living things, life cycle, and digestive system. So this is my best case scenario, because with that, then students will actually generally find the questions not so difficult to do. Okay, so it will be easier, and it will not have so much stress on the students, which I hope that Ministry of Education, they will really take into consideration this stressful time for all the students, with all the home-based learning and the parents also working from home. They will really tone down the paper to make it a standard okay paper for the PSLE students this year. Okay. Now, in terms of the topics wise, P5 topics, let me show you the statistics for P5 life science topics. So these are the P5 upper block topics. That means all the topics that I mentioned in my previous slide here. So there's a reproduction in plants and respiratory system, circulatory system, unit of life, and plant transport system, plus the these few topics, not including the lower block life science topics. So if you are looking at this, then in terms of the MCQ wise and open-ended, you realize that the MCQ questions actually take quite a huge chunk, even more than the other topics that I mentioned before. 16, 14, 8, 14, and 16. So the number of P5 life science questions can take as many as 4 to 8 questions. Open-ended marks wise, it can range from 3, which was only last year, very little, and the rest are 9, 8, and 11. So in terms of the life science P5 topics for open-ended, the marks has gone down last year. So this year, I should be actually expecting more. But as to whether they will increase all the 20 marks to this all these P5 life science topics, it remains to be seen. But if we look at the interactions in environment topics, what the ministry will need to do is to replace about 4 to 5 MCQ, which means that it's actually quite easy for them to replace. For each of the MCQ, they just have to pick one topic of the life science from P5 and set a question from there. One more additional question. Then for the open-ended question part, they can easily find another same few topics and then set another few questions from there, which could easily cover the marks from the 4 topics that has been taken away. So in terms of this, I would prefer definitely my best case scenario, because students who have learned all these topics from P5 and they who have done a lot more practices from the P5 SA2 exam to SA1 exam. I know some schools, they didn't already have it last year, but they still have their bite-sized tests. And also, of course, I do hope that the practices that the students would have done at home in assessment books or even in their own individual tuition centers, they would actually have done more question practices on these topics, and it will actually be fresher for them because it's just what they have learned in P5. Okay. So coming to this, the tips that I want to give you parents of what to make most up for this June holidays. No, not this June, this May holidays. Holidays shifted to May already. So understand that these topics wise, it doesn't matter so much of whether they are going to be shifting to which topic. Of course, preferably not physical science because it's tougher. The more important thing is that you must understand your child's areas of weaknesses. So how do you check on your child's area of weaknesses? For those of you whose child has done the CA1 paper, you can actually refer to the CA1 paper to check how to look at your child's main areas of weaknesses. So for certain students, I usually group them in 3 groups. Certain students, they are weak in their concept. If they are weak in their concept, you realize that they can choose easily the wrong answer in the MCQ question, even though the MCQ option for the answer is actually quite obvious. Okay, so that's one. Next, the second group of students are those that still have problems understanding question. Okay, so for students who have problems understanding question, that is because they are still not good in some of their science skills. Science, we do a lot of experiments and we do a lot of testing and hands-on. So there's a lot of skills that the students actually learn. And if the child are not strong in learning and understanding these skills, that's when they can encounter problems in answering their questions. And of course, we also talk about open-ended answering technique. So students, they may just go through answering when they get their paper, they'll just write down when they read through the question. But there's actually steps that the child can actually go through in order to make their answering technique better. Then there's also the last group of students who may be doing quite well in their exams, but because they do not understand the question requirements, that means they do not understand what the question is really asking for, that's when they can have incomplete answers. So if you look through your child's CA paper, okay, or even last year's SA2 paper, you can get some of the mistakes that they make. Is it because they do not understand the concept? Is it because they do not understand a certain part of the question? Or is it because they answered the question, but their question is missing a few marks here and there? So that's when you have to diagnose your child's area of weakness from there in order to help them
You press this again. Unmute
on these problems. Okay. So now the thing is, for me, I teach many students and I help them understand these three main areas of weaknesses by going through helping them understanding the concept, helping them to do hands-on activities, demonstrations and experiments so that they actually have the experience of learning some skills. Because I know that there are certain schools that teachers don't really bring them to their science lab so much, to the point that some may only go less than 5 times a year to the science lab. Okay, then, but I also help them to connect using all these skills that they have learned, concepts that they have learned, to apply it to the questions in order to answer their questions properly. Okay, so the thing about this is, I do take many classes all over the place, but with this online thing that is now happening, all my classes are actually happening online. So for those of you who thinks that you still need additional help for your children, then do ask me or inquire about my sessions that